Hi, welcome to class. We're the only two right now, but the other ones will show up eventually, right? I hate my life. I hate my life.
And Professor Sunreis Productions!
Hello class, Professor Sunreis here. Today's class is sadly very serious, as we're learning on how to deal with government surveillance. I know, it sounds rough, but hear me out. The government has infiltrated Yu-Gi-Oh! For quite some time now, but I'm here to stop them. I, a freedom-loving individual, I'm going to show you on how to deal with government surveillance properly. Shit, they're already here. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave some feedback down below, and let's get into the video. Hello class, I'm back. I found a hideout, but I don't have a lot of time. If anything happens to me, I want you to be able to follow my legacy. So in today's class, we are going to take a look at how to beat Floowandereeze by taking a look at the common deck list, showcasing how the engine actually functions, where the common and not so common chokepoints are, and talking about where the deck's strength and weakness lie, and most importantly, some virtual tips and tricks for you, so you guys can take advantage of them. So this is a very common deck list. At least the main deck is the top 4 from the German Nationals. So this is the bare bone you will see in a day-to-day basis playing against Floowandereeze. Of course, things can change. For example, the defensive cards can change to some degree, but usually this 2/3 of the decks is usually gonna stay pretty much the same, only 1 to 2 changes. But let's just talk about a common list. Of course, you have the best Floowandereeze and Rubina and Eaglin. These are the main starters. Next to that, you have the map, which is an insanely strong card, giving you a good amount of consistency, being able to play through hand traps that usually hurt the deck quite hard, and making it so that every small bird is a starter is really good. Of course, you have a terraforming to search that. You have Floowandereeze Advent of the Adventure, which is an insane card, being a consistency tool to search out the small birds by getting rid of like big birds and tribute stuff, or just dodging imperms, failures, whatever. It's a really strong card, and this is what made the deck function on a competitive level. Before this card was released, the deck did not really do too well, but now it's like an insanely good anti-meta pick. Of course, not being using the extra deck or special summoning at all gives you insane consistency tools in prosperity and duality. Now for the not so great cards, as you can see, there are quite few gassy cards in this deck, which is one, but we'll get later to that. You have 2 Empen. This is switching up sometimes. I don't know the exact reason for that, but sometimes people are only on 1 Empen. You have 1 Toucan and 1 Stree. Sometimes people play 2 Stree. These are just for the utility loop. And just having that extra few small birds gives you a nice consistency boost with the adventure and the magnificent map. You have 1 Explode Winds and 1 Dreaming Town. These are super recurable thanks to Toucans, so it's not really that big of a deal to only play one of them. And then for like boss monsters, I guess, you have Barrier Statue, you have Riser, you have Apex. As you can see, these are quite a few like engine requirements cards. I think it's 9 cards, so that's pretty big. The current meta is very Mystic Mine heavy, so they are playing Mystic Mine as the board break. Of course, they have the D-Shifter, which is by far the strongest card of the deck. You can play an Ash, but these could also just be Dark Ruler. A lot of people are not on Ashes in this deck, but it's really good against Bright Infusion, of course. DD Crow is super searchable by the deck because Rubina can just search it, so if DD Crow is good in the meta, you definitely have to deal with that. They will, like 99% of the time, play a Mystic Mine main deck out, as the deck kind of struggles against that. And they usually have a Call by the Grave because it's like super strong right now. In the side deck, you will only see Board Breakers and Harpy Featherstorm, basically. So this is what you have to prepare for, and the extra deck is basically non-existent apart from Zeus and an Underworld Goddess to out problematic boss monsters. So what is the actual game plan of the deck? It's quite simple. It's only basically 1 combo, and that is, it can differ here and there depending on how you start, but usually it's just normal summoning Rubina, searching an Eaglin, then normal summoning the Eaglin. If Dueling Book would be working, it would allow me to summon here. Normal summon Eaglin, search out the Empen, and now you tribute those 2, go for an Empen, chanting 1 Empen, of course they get banished. Chanting 1 Empen, usually people get the Eaglin or Rubina, but depending on the rest of the hand, you get back 1 of them to the hand. Chain blocking the Empen, of course, in the meantime is quite strong. Getting the Dreaming Town, and then you set the Dreaming Town and you pass a turn. That is the bare minimum combo. Once you have that 1 extra Eaglin, for example, if you don't have to search an Eaglin with a Rubina because you already have it, you will get an barrier with it, but that's like not always the case. And then in the opponent's turn, once they committed 1 or 2 bodies to the field, or you are forced to use the Dreaming Town because it's only in the main phase, you can force it out quite good. The opponent's gonna activate the Dreaming Town, Rubina effect, chain Eaglin, search the barrier statue if you didn't have it already, then effect Eaglin, get into the hand, summon Eaglin, effect Eaglin, search Avian, or Riser, depending on the situation. Most of the time it's Riser, and then depending on the situation, you will use your extra normal summon for either this or this, depending on what you really need. Most of the time you will be using the Riser just so that you can get rid of the opponent's cards, and then you trigger the Dreaming Town's effect in Graveyard to banish it, and then Book of Moon all opponent monsters, which is really good disruption tool, of course, making it also so that this card is banished, so you can get it back by a toucan, so you don't need to search this. You can also search a toucan, for example, to get your resource loop going again. Of course, these would be banished as well, and you could get one of them back. So once you're in that situation, you just have a very strong resource loop of using Robina and Eaglin and the two other birds for utility purposes and these for value purposes. And then you just keep on looping Risers, putting back stuff on the opponent's deck on top of it, so they have a very bad draw, getting rid of problematic monsters, and just having big beat sticks on the board and just control the game off that point forward. This is a very simple deck. There's not a lot to it. These combos don't really differ all too much. It's basically always Robin into Eaglin into Empan, and then just pass on that basically. So now that we know how typical deck lists look like and the most basic game plan, let's talk about strengths and weaknesses. So now you know how the deck will actually function in a more realistic game state, where it's not only the bread and butter combo against the bread and butter combo. Just let's talk about what the deck is really good at. So most importantly, what's the biggest strength of the deck is the amount of auto win cards you have available to you. Dimension Shifter is an auto win against 99% of the matter if they don't draw exactly Brave Engine plus a shit ton of hand traps. Barrier Statue itself is an auto win against everything which doesn't summon any wind monsters or in a mirror or like Eldritch basically. The Riser into Dreaming Town itself is also really strong because it can get rid of like 2 to 3 body / like actual useful cards for the opponent, so that's also really strong, but it's not really an auto win. And most importantly, Empan against anything which is link heavy is also really strong because it's basically a VFD on the field at that point against those decks. Add to that you have an Harpy's Featherstorm in your side deck, and like Prosperity and Duality for that post side going first. This deck is almost unbeatable if it draws decently. This is by far the biggest strength the deck has. Add to that you have a very strong resource loop, making it so that even if the opponent has like maybe 1 or 2 like equalizers, board breakers, you have such a good grind game that you usually don't care, and you also have still enough tempo even though it's kind of low, so that if the opponent decides to just pass after they get de-shifted or after they maybe did one monster effect and you Featherstormed them, they just pass. You have big enough beat sticks, you have an Empan, you have a Riser, you have an Avian, where you can just OTK your opponent, so it's not like they can just pass and wait those floodgates out as well. Probably the most annoying thing next to D-Shifter is just the amount of chain blocking the deck does. It just feels very unfair that like all of the remotely relevant effects, being the Empan, like the tribute summon effects, and then like the Rubinas and the Eaglins, you can all just chain block them with the recursion effects of those birds, which just feels really unfair. So everything which is remotely dangerous to your own game plan, this can be chain blocked, making so that it's very hard to make use of Omni Negates like a Griffin, a Baroness, a Crystal Wing. I don't know what other Omni Negates there are currently in the meta, but it's really hard to make use of them against the deck. You can usually only hit like the map, maybe the adventure, the prosperities and stuff like that, so it's very annoying. It's definitely one of the biggest strengths the deck has. Add to that the deck has quite a diverse end board with like 2 floodgates on the field and then having something in the back row, going either into more disruption in the form of removal or into an Omni Negate, making it so that even if the opponent has a Dark Ruler, it's still not there, just there because you still have a way to get into an Omni Negate or into removal. Add to that you a lot of times, like 30% of the times, will have a shifter with that, making so even if the opponent has the board breakers to get rid of the 1 barrier statue, if you have shifter, you still basically win. Add to that the deck doesn't lose to Cyflock at all, just because it doesn't summon from the extra deck at any point in the normal combo, or like 99% of the games, which was of course the first reason which the deck got popular with, just because it was a very good anti-meta pick into the DPE Cyflock times, which is of course a really strong thing, because still there are quite a few decks which try to end on a Scythe. With cards like Prosperity and Duality also comes the added benefit that post-side it will be very easy to find your side decks card, just making your post-side game just slightly more stronger, because sometimes you can dig 9 deep into your main deck. With the 5 cards you draw, you can basically look through half your deck, making it so that cards like Featherstorm, Dark Ruler, even it can be very easily found. And lastly, the deck has inherent ways to stop its biggest weakness, which is targeted effects like Effect Veiler or Imperm, which bypass the chain blocking. You can play around those with cards like Floowandereeze, Advent of the Adventure, or Book of Moon, which people are currently not too keen on. But I haven't played Floowandereeze a lot, but I think that with people going back to 1 to 2 hand traps meta, making so that they want 2 hand traps in their hand, people will probably put in Book of Moons again, just because there will be a shit ton of Veilers and Imperms in a lot of main decks right now, making it just so that you have a little more robust engine than you usually have. So now that we talked about the deck's biggest strengths, let's talk about the weaknesses, because there are plenty of them, and in my opinion are far outweigh the strengths. So most importantly, you can see it here in the deck list. I somewhat structured it from like good cards, like gassy cards, starters or extenders, into engine requirements, into defensive cards. And as you can see here, you realistically only have 19 gassy / extender cards or starters. Then you have 9 engine requirements, which is absurd. A lot of these cards don't really give you anything worthwhile unless you have basically whole combo already, at which point they are like very, very bad extenders. And then you have 12 defensive cards, which I guess is still pretty solid, but most importantly, the deck just breaks a lot. You only really have 1 true 1 card combo in Rubina, while you do have plenty of ways to find it. Not even half your deck is like gassy. It's good. It's starters, it's extenders. So a lot of times, especially in like long tournament days with like 9 or 11 rounds of Swiss, you will just break a lot of times, not only because you don't see starters, but most importantly because you have like so many bad cards in your deck, which is by far the biggest weakness the deck has. Add to that, which I like scratched over a few times, the deck is just very low tempo. Even if you draw stuff like Dark Ruler, if you draw the board breakers, which you need, a lot of times these will just not be enough, because the deck only really does something to hinder the opponent's main engine, via Shifter, of course, but after that, it's only realistically on like the 3rd summon with an Empen or an Riser. So the deck, and even then, it's not really a lot. So the deck really struggles to break established board, even if it draws auto-win cards like Dark Ruler and stuff like that. Add to that the game plan the deck has is very straightforward, so there's very little that you can do to outplay your opponent, which is especially problematic because the opponent at some point will always know what your cards in the hand will be, so they can, if they have the capabilities to it and they know how the deck functions, think about steps like 2, 5, 6 steps ahead, and they will always know what exactly will happen in the turn, making it so that you don't really have a lot of tools to outplay the opponent, which of course is something which you really want to take capability of if you're playing a deck like Sword Soul, Virtual World, Punk Brave decks, which are really high skill ceiling or like higher skill ceiling than this deck, and you can really make use of your own skill which you have with the deck, which is something Floowandereeze just completely lacks. And while it is a very good engine, once it gets rolling, it can still very easily be stopped by 1 hand trap. If your Arena gets impermed and you don't have a Book of Moon or an Advent of Adventure, your turn basically stops unless you have exactly Map plus Eglin, at which point you have like an insane hand. So even if the resource loop is super strong and you cannot get rid of it once you are there, getting into that can be kind of tricky. And like I said again, I'm thinking we are getting into one or meta where people want 2 hand traps in their deck, so they play like anything 12 upwards of hand traps or defensive cards. You will really struggle to even get into your engine in the first place. Lastly, the deck really struggles against very common floodgates right now with Mystic Mine, or even stuff like Skill Drain, Goes Match, that can only be one, can really hinder the deck. And add to that it really struggles to out, mostly because of its low tempo and not really that broad of a utility. It really struggles against unaffected boss monsters like Psychic and Punisher and Rival Nister. That's my opinion, these weaknesses, especially the consistency one, and it probably not being a good meta call in the future right now is, in my opinion, a reason why you should never play Floowandereeze. Not even for honor reason, because it's an unfun deck. In my opinion, it's just not very good. And especially if you're a good player, you should stick away. Or if you want to become a good player, you should probably stick away from Floowandereeze. So now that you know how the deck's strengths and weaknesses, I'm gonna showcase you guys all of the deck's utility and how they will interact with your engine, or how you will have to interact with their engine at any point. So, for example, they do have great graveyard manipulation with this tree and riser, making it so that any sort of disruption you have in your graveyard, or any sort of follow-up you have in the graveyard, is not really that safe against them, because they can do their normal plays. With 3, for example, just chain that into the normal loop you have with your small birds, and you can get rid of important graveyard setup you have for the next turn, for example, or if it is snow, for example, they can easily get rid of cards like that. Add to that they have an Omni-Negate with Apex Avian, if you are able to force out the Dreaming Town, making it so that you kind of always will have to deal with some sort of disruption for that. So if you had something which dies to an Omni-Negate, you maybe want to do that before the Dreaming Town resolves, but if you commit to the Dreaming Town Book of Moon effect, maybe those are some things you have to take into consideration at all points while trying to break the opponent's board. The next thing of disruption they have is an VFD type effect on the Empen. So attack position monster a special summon attack position monster cannot activate their effects on the Empen. So if you're playing a linked heavy deck, you will have to take special care of an Empen next to the barrier statue. So it will be very hard for you to play under an Empen if you're playing any sort of linked decks. Like I said already, they have a Book of Moon, or it's even Book of Life, or I don't know, at least a Book of Moon on the whole board once they resolve the Dreaming Town and attribute summon something while it's in the graveyard. Take special notice for this if you disrupted the first Dreaming Town. For example, you impermed like the first guy and he couldn't dodge it or something, they will still have it in the graveyard. So once you're in a grind game and they start to tribute summon again when they're in their turn, they can use the Dreaming Town in their graveyard as a very great disruption tool. They can chain block it like they always do, and getting rid of your whole board or the whole disruption you have in the monster zone. So if you have Omni-Negates lying there like a Griffin, Baroness, Crystal Wing, stuff like that, you're kind of forced out to use them quite early on once they start playing, just because the Dreaming Town will be chain blocked and will be able to get rid of your whole monster field basically. While they don't have a lot of removal, they have the strongest form of removal in the game, being a tribute removal. It is from a spell, so unaffected monsters still cannot be affected, but Unexplored Winds is an insane card to get rid of opponent's monsters or anything. It can tribute anything your opponent has, or in our case it will be us. So take special notice of this. This is very important because it shifts the choke points one turn earlier or one step earlier, but we'll get to that once we talk about the choke points. Just be aware that the deck does have tribute removal. Next to that, they also have Riser for removal, as it bounces or shuffles back into the deck cards. So this is targeting, so it is not as strong, but this is usually chain blocked, so it's very hard to react to that to any sort of degree. So keep that in mind. And lastly, it can run over stuff because 2.8 and 2.7k are quite strong. And Empen also has an attack manipulator. Is it the word? It is. For now, banishing one card from the hand, being able to halve opponents' attack points on the monster is really strong, so they can basically run over anything. So these are the form of removal. Like I said, they're quite low, so it's not really that important and not that threatening, but it's removal nonetheless, so you have to respect it. They do have a searchable DD Crow, like I said earlier. This is probably falling out of favor for now because DD Crow is not that good in the main deck right now. It still will be in the side deck, so if your deck struggles against a DD Crow, be aware that they do have a DD Crow available to them at any point in their combo. If they have the pieces drawn already, if they have a statue, they can just search a crow. If they have an Eaglem, they can just search a crow. So always be aware of that. Lastly, they of course have the barrier statue, but I think this is not really any sort of utility. It's just a win condition at that point. Maybe it's smart to add that they don't really use the extra deck at all, apart from a Zeus, which can happen if they have 2 level 1 birds on the field. They can go into Liverless, Link once, and have a very easy time to go into Zeus, even under stuff like Baguska or like big monsters, because they can either attack directly or they can go for an unaffected monster and just attack you and then make a Zeus. They can also play down with it, so they can go for a format Zeus. Keep that in mind. And lastly, if they have 4 birds on the field or 4 monsters on the field in general, they can go into an Underworld Goddess to get rid of unaffected monsters like a Psychic Punisher or an Arrival Attic Nister. So this is all the utility the deck has. Lastly, let's take a look at the choke points, which are the most important stuff you have to deal with, of course, because these make or break the match, of course. So now that we went through everything basically about the deck, let's talk about how we can actually stop the deck. So most importantly, the deck, while it has a very strong resource loop, like I said already, it is very low tempo wise, making it so that you realistically have 1 to 2 choke points a turn, which remotely start to threaten your own board. So if you can stop your opponent from getting 2 birds on the field, and then they have to use the normal summon again, and you can mid-chain, so example, they have Eagle and a Robina on the field, and they have chaining 1 Robina, chaining 2, getting another bird, and you can start to get rid of one of those bodies at that point. They cannot go into any of the 2-bit summons, and they cannot really remotely threaten your board. They cannot start to get their Dreaming Town, they cannot get their Unexplored Winds, they cannot start to remove your bodies by Ryza, by Apex Avian, by Empan, whatsoever. So at any point, if the opponent has 2 bodies on the field, you will have to do something to disrupt the opponent. Of course, if you have like a full board, you can maybe let it resolve. If you have an imperm set, you can maybe play with that. But keep in mind, they can play around an imperm with an Unexplored Winds. They can even banish a Ryza the Mega Monarch. This whole choke point of them needing 2 bodies on the field to do anything remotely threatening can be worked around with. For example, if they have an Emperor on the board, they can always just tribute summon this for a Ryza, because Ryza can use 1 tribute summon monster for its own summon. They can also use an Apex Avian for that. Or if they have Unexplored Winds, because Unexplored Winds can tribute summon one of your own cards. So if you have Unexplored Winds on the field, you will have to trigger at any one summon, which would be very hard to deal with, so it's best to just remove it as soon as possible. Or if they have an Empen or an Apex Avian out, they will be able to summon an Ryza very quickly. Luckily, like I said, the deck is very telegraphed, it's very easy to see. Most of the time you know 99% of the cards they have available to them, apart from their draw for turn and maybe like the 1 random card which they set. You will always know what they have at basically any point, so it's very easy to, if you think about all the cards they have available to them, very easy to just think about the whole turn and how it will play out. So if you're a good player, you can think forward 2, 3, 4 steps ahead and really make them punish for them playing such a linear and easy to read through deck. Like I said, while the deck can be stopped with 1 Imperm or Vela, it can be very punishing to throw an Imperm or Vela on the first summon, because they have, like I said, Advent of Adventure, but a lot of times they are also on Book of Moon. Because it's a very good disruptive tool. It's a good going second card. You can set it going first, and most importantly, you can use it to dodge the most strongest card against your own deck. And with 2 hand traps being the meta now, I can definitely see people going back on the Book of Moon. I've never played Floowandereeze, so don't take that for granted. But in my opinion, it would just make sense to fit in back Book of Moon, making it so that they have 6 to even 7 outs for like a Vela, for example. So you really want to be careful to throw your Imperm or your Vela on the first summon. It's much better to save that for an Empen. For example, if you know they didn't have a barrier statue yet, and then you hit the Empen, you get rid of most of everything which they have, because they won't be able to get the Dreaming Town, so you will get rid of a lot of disruption. You will just have to deal with an Empen, or you can just keep it for your own turn and start to hit the barrier statue with the Imperm. Because barrier statue is usually the most important stuff to hit. You can, if you have enough resources, you can push through an Empen, you can push through a Dreaming Town, Book of Mooning 1 monster, and maybe Ryza getting rid of another stuff. But barrier statue is usually where it's like either you can play under it like somewhat fine, for example if you play a lot of wind monsters, or you cannot play under it at all. So keeping an Imperm for those stuff is usually better. But of course, if you have 2 Imperms, 2 hand traps, just attack them with them, and they can usually not play through them, of course. Most importantly, which is something I've learned quite fast, is bluffing an Evenly match is insanely strong against them. Evenly is super popular right now, so it's not like they can be like, oh, maybe he's bluffing, but it's basically every side deck for now, and it's really good against Floowandereeze no matter what. And just going start of main phase and immediately, okay, battle phase or end of main phase, makes them think, okay, now I kind of have to use my Dreaming Town. I won't be able to get a lot of disruption out of it, but at least I will still get an Apex Avian out of it, which is still plenty enough, and I will still get my resources back. So it's not like they're losing a lot. They're just not losing everything. So like 9 out of 10 times, I believe, we'll use the Dreaming Town to not lose to an evenly matched super hard, especially if they have a barrier statue out and an Empen. They don't want to lose both of them. So it's very wise to just go straight into the battle phase and use or fake it evenly, just making it so that you don't have to deal with like 2 or 3 bodies of yours getting removed. You will just have to deal with one more Omni Negate, which you of course in turn can just out with an evenly match if you have it. So that's like the most important thing, which I basically always do, just making it way easier to deal with the board. Also, it makes cards like Dark Ruler and Droplet even better if they don't have Shifter, of course, just because Dark Ruler after you force out the Dreaming Town is very strong, getting rid of every disruption the opponent has. Also very important to think about when you want to normal summon, because Floowandereeze Magnificent Map can make it so that if you normal summon mid-turn and you, for example, disrupted the Dreaming Town at some point, they can just have a Dreaming Town with the map, making it so that they can just use their resource loop again. So you will have to be very careful. You usually only want to normal if they don't have map, of course, or at the very start of the turn, so that it's not really that big of an issue for you and not really that beneficial for the opponent, where he has like that extra way to get stuff on the field. But be careful. If you know they have a lot of big guys in their hand, they can get a second tribute summon in their own turn if you decide to normal summon after they already resolved Dreaming Town. So always be careful for that. And lastly, while it's not really a choke point, while siding, keep in mind that D-Shifter is an insane card. I kind of like to take the approach that if they have D-Shifter, I'm likely going to lose as well. So I'm not siding too many cards out which die under D-Shifter. But for example, you cannot Droll, you cannot Veiler, you cannot Droplet under D-Shifter. These are all things you want to consider in a side deck while siding, just because it's such an insane blowout card against so many decks. But at least for me, I like to take the approach that it's not really worth it to side for a D-Shifter. Just because if they have a 9 out of 10 times, we are gonna lose anyways, unless we draw only Engine and we are able to set up like stuff like Khaldun, Brave. But more on that after we talked about these choke points. So in my opinion, these are the most important things you have to keep in mind while playing against Floowandereeze. So if you're not playing Brave Virtual World, this is basically everything I can teach you in this video. Now let's get into some Brave Virtual tricks for the matchup. So here we are at home now. We have Mami Shanshan with us. This is where I'm feeling fine. So let's talk about Brave Virtual World and how it interacts with Floowandereeze. Actually, we probably have, after Eldritch, the easiest time against Floowandereeze to any meta deck or like rogue deck, just because we are playing Brave, which is already a very good engine, into the Floowandereeze engine. It can play under D-Shifter to some degree. It can force out the trap really easily without committing too much, just because it's like an extra engine and you don't really play your main game plan. You can out Empen quite easily. Griffin is a wind monster which you can summon to run over the barrier statue. Add to that we have a game plan even if we get Shifter, just because if we hard draw a Kowloon or a Choo-Choo, we can set it up. Even though our virtuals don't function under Shifter, they will still try to resolve as far as possible, making it so that they will banish one card and then not summon themselves, and because they did not summon themselves, they will not do the third thing which they do, but which is totally fine. If you hard draw a Kowloon or a Choo-Choo, like I said, you can set that up and through a Shifter, making so that if your opponent only has a Shifter, you can still put up a threatening ward of an Omni Negate and a Choo-Choo, which they will have struggled to play through, especially if they are top deck reliant, which most of the time will make it so that they will have to hard draw the map or one bird. Making it so that you can pop the map and then the one bird, even if it's a Robina, you can just Omni Negate it. So that's really good. You can play under Shifter, which is like the most important thing. Add to that like half of the deck is wind, making it so that barrier statue is not really that big of a deal, and Empen is basically you don't care about it at all. The only thing which is remotely relevant for that is that it's somewhat annoying if you have to use, for example, a Break Sword to out it, that you have to summon it in defense. You cannot go into a Zeus. But honestly, it really didn't happen to me too often that I cared about that. Usually you can play around that. So honestly, the Brave Virtual World is probably one of the biggest reasons you want to play this deck, is you have an insane Floowandereeze matchup and you're not even playing Eldritch for that. So you can play like a cool deck, which is like a cool gimmick, and you have a good Floowandereeze matchup. So in my opinion, it's all you really want to. And this is basically it, which I wanted to say. Everything else which I talked about applies to every deck. Now we only have like the Brave Virtual World trips, and it's like, okay, set up Choo-Choo and Griffin if you hard draw them. under shifter and pray that they don't have anything else, which is basically the gameplay against Floowandereeze for most of the decks. Other than if they have D-shifter, they cannot do anything. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Of course, leave some feedback down below like always. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Class is dismissed. You guys are dismissed as well. Professor Sunreis out. Peace.